Greetings and salutations, brave hearts, mahogany majestic muses, poetic justices, vineyard creatives, coach mad hatters, I crimson velvet VIPs, and the intra personal nation. I am your host, Skylar Indigo Inc., and I welcome you to the summer session of Walking the Golden Mile. We're going to start this segment off with the following notes to self. 1. Prepare yourself for type 2 fun. Number 2, humble yourself to be open to your newness. Number 3, lean into the call to honestly share in the present moment. 4, therapeutically capture the process. And 5, take note of the transparency of your good, your bad, and your indifference as it fertilizes your wisdom and maturity. This is part 1, and I am titling it Operation Clean Slate, Preparing for Eclipse Season. Today is June 30th, 2019, and so we are right at the threshold of the solar new moon in Cancer that will be here on Tuesday, July 2nd. Energies have already begun to usher in. Just yesterday, I received some news that almost plummeted me into a pit of despair and threatened to wipe out all of the balance that had been brought in through the last 2 weeks of meditation. I honestly had to sit down and breathe and dial it back and step outside of that moment to regather and recenter, recalibrate. With that said, I know that I'm being called to share with the collective, which honestly is outside of my comfort zone. And when I say share with the collective, I mean recording how I feel and posting it in the public domain. I'm not unfamiliar with one on one conversations. I've been a hairstylist, or had been, retired in 2010, and at that time I had benchmarked 20 years, as well as 12 years in nonprofit marketing and member services. So one on one conversations, I am completely comfortable in. Speaking to the collective, I am not. But I know that there are things that's going on, especially with the new ushering of energies and planetary alignments and the increase of awareness in the individual scheme of things with regards to self actualization and wisdom maturity. We are being asked to serve as living examples and express freely of our challenges as well as our triumphs so that we may be, I'll say, support for those that walk alongside us. With that being said, I'm going to dive into I'm going to dive into, and I giggle because it's still very new to me, but um, it's a project that I have been finding great pride in, even with the irony that is in tow of it. So I have taken up the project to draft my own obituary. And it came into play in 2017 when I lost my mom. And with me being one of the more practiced word wizards of the family, of course, the project naturally landed in my lap. Having such project sent me tumbling down a rabbit hole that was much more about me than it was about my mom. The project became intriguing. I was able to learn a lot about her that reconciled things that I had perceived indifference. And it gave me salve to some unfinished business, some seemingly unfinished business that lingered over our relationship when she was in the flesh. The project also had me, what I often say, have a round table with death. Conversations with death was incredible. So much so that it provoked me to write about it. And I can't remember right at the moment if which is posted. You're welcome to visit my blog and take a look at it if you care to do so. Blog is on behalf of the story .blogspot.com. It's I want to say it's not on the home page, but it's been a while since I composed it, so my mind cannot direct you to it right at the moment. But you're welcome to go and browse and 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 discover some wonderfully wacky things, which I'm sure you will eventually bump into the piece where I spoke in clarity about certain conversations that I had with death. And it's almost like it showed up disappointed in how we try to elude it, bamboozle it, escape its grips, and how we as a culture, especially American culture, have built up this wall of fear around it, when in actuality, it's not necessarily death more so than it is transitioning out of embodiment, and that we ought not be so afraid of it, and that our habits around it shouldn't be so daunting, and that our grief for the loss of the person has somehow tainted the actual experience of the individual. So it took me for a loop at first. I really truly thought that I was batshit crazy for even thinking that I sat across the table from death and was having tea, like just to give you just to give you brain space to the energy that surrounded us. It was not scary, it was not intimidating, it was not outlandish, it was none of that. And I'm pretty sure that just because of all that has been projected to me around death, that I visioned it as this faceless being with a hooded cloak. But it didn't carry like no harsh weapons, or didn't have fingers of skeletal bones or none of that wacky shit. It was almost as if it came to plead to me to write its case, to write about how we ought to be honoring such transition, and that it doesn't have to be so grim, and that there is space of celebration. Contemplating those conversations allowed me the awareness that my mom being outside of her embodiment meant that all that ailed her body could no longer keep her in suffering. And yes, her absence brought on grief, but the notion that her body was no longer going to restrict her in any kind of way was to be celebrated. As a generational habit, due to my cultural denomination, death has been at the hands of so much tragedy that I don't blame our funeralistic rituals. But I am here to oppose it, even if it's just on my behalf. I'm not into such things. I'm really not at peace with folks gathering to be saddened or full of sorrow because I'm no longer in this flesh. So drafting my obituary feels more like a declaration of freedom to me. And it also feels like a time capsule where I will properly be frozen into print, preserved into print, and that those that want to visit with me can utilize it as a learning piece to where my mind and heart reside during the moments when we are unable to be together. Because at the end of the day, it really feels like the honoring of one's life has to somehow be in conjunction with the better understanding of one's life. And that we truly do take for granted this whole cookie cutter syndrome that we got going on. And yes, it is intertwined in this generational curse mixology, but there's nothing to say that it can't be challenged, opposed, uprooted, redirected, recultivated, replenished, redistributed. And I'm not even sure if this is such an outlandish, weird, unconventional feat. I think that there are several that have taken up the cause to draft such peace and lightness of what they would want folks that gathered in celebration of life in celebration of their life to be reviewing during that time, because what it will be is a collective of focused awareness on me. In hopes that during that time that love and light will be sent into the ether to secure my safe passage into whatever other dimension I decide to step into or have already decided to step into after my experience within this realm. And so after that, I became madly obsessed with understanding what I came here to do, and became unapologetically protective of my time and what I will and will not involve myself with. Understanding my astral gifts, understanding my astrological makeup and my invisible zones and the sprucing up of my imaginary realms and my connectivity to the imaginal, which is what Carl Gustav Jung would consider the collective unconscious, the bigger invisible picture. My contributions to such entity ensures that my existence here, while embodied, will be navigated in a much more masterly fashion. Does not ensure I'm going to get it all right. Doesn't even ensure that it's going to be all happy after this. But it does ensure that I'll have a better understanding and be able to see through the bullshit. That's what it does ensure. And I'm good with that. I can leave room for surprise knowing that I have insights that are connected to invisible source that's divinely capable of guiding me through the darkness. So, for the sake of clarity, my conversations with death led me to pulling my birth record, as well as studying more about my access to what is called the invisible library within the fantastical world, but also known as the Akashic Records. Also fine tuned my academic attractions to the healing arts, especially with regards to aromatherapy, stones, and crystals, and led me to the concept of golden chaos. I now consider myself the golden wildling. Understanding my astrological dynamics helped me embrace and better utilize my chaotic reflections of what I felt was a childhood gone bad. being in scholarship of the master teachers that research and develop the mystic and the ancient mysteries and the realms considered the woo woo, the paranormal, within those realms came a solid understanding of what had not been explained in any other realm, religious or otherwise. Only inside the magical realm did I find myself properly explained. And I began to look at myself differently. My esteem surrounding myself grew immeasurably. Now, I still grapple with the, what can I say, the level of dismissive nature around the powers of the planet, energetic influences, and how a lot of explanations are gathered from the mainstream versus one digging deep into its subconscious to gather its own and then having reality affirm it or confirm it. But it's stemming from within, being brought out, and then weighed. We will go and attempt to gather information outside of ourselves to attempt to understand what's going on inside of ourselves. And so I think that's a bit ass backwards. I always have. And because we live in a predominantly trendy trajectory that is built on big religion, big pharma, big media, expressing myself knowing that it is such jagged edged is what leaves me uncomfortable in certain situations. But as I said in the beginning, I am being called to stand firm on what I am naturally attracted to, which happens to be inside the ancient mysteries, mystical, fantastical realms of this dimension, which I really truly believe is the depiction of the outer dimension. And that being a Capricorn sun, a Virgo moon, and a Virgo rising, that Saturn and Mercury specifically sent me here to be the messenger of certain nuances, challenge certain traditions, and bring into light the unconventional means of the courtship with self and invisible muses. That I am to be the ambassador of one's Akashic records and sign them up for their library card so that they may begin to tap into their invisible library, so that they may begin to reconcile their past, their present, and their future, so that they may begin to express themselves regardless of agreement, that they may lean into the courage that calls them to stand up, speak up, as well as the courage to sit down and remain silent. With that being said, I have developed a catalyst called Coaching Mad Hatter's Underland University. It is a remote university, and that it operates along the lines of the Akashic Records, meaning that it is an invisible academic source. Its primary objective is to enhance the courtship with self, to build one's imaginary realms, and to incorporate a valuing system around the intangibles to offset this chronic illusion of the tangibles, to invite them to an ongoing acquaintance with the muses and the crafting of their own romanticisms and cultivating of consciousness, as well as the mastering of their own golden chaos, to mature their wisdom in respect to succession, to appreciate the good, the bad, and the indifference, as well as become familiar with something that I like to call karma kindness. Being a Capricorn sun, my lessons are they're rigid, and I had to tussle with pulling the goodness out of situations that really made me want to give up and run and give up. Not in any specific order. It ebbed and flowed when it felt like it. As I am approaching the threshold of 50 years, 50 years old in human years. None of my life looked like how I imagined it when I was 25. None of it. And as this summer session continues to unfold, definitely as I lean into the challenges of exposing such tender parts to the collective, my seemingly overbearing mistakes and mishaps now arrive to me in reflection with a different view. There are some spaces in my life I still feel like major mistakes were made. But it's quite intriguing how this quiet, mild voice will greet me first thing in the morning to explain to me that some things had to happen the way that they did, and that I, even though I played a major part in ushering it into this reality, that a bigger play was at play. That the invisible bigger picture had nuance to it that I would not learn of until later on in my years when things have had its moment to blossom and mature, which includes my perceptions and understanding of myself and of others. And that sometimes what feels like a bad mistake to me was precisely what the heavens ordered. That to stand in chaotic situations does not mean it's a bad thing. And that because we live in this ultra positive era, it's really doing us such a disservice because we become scared to view what's the so-called negative. We lose our courage to stand up and confront. We will settle for so-called peace when in actuality we ought to be confronting. We ought to be overthrowing this thing called implied consent. And so with that said, I'm going to close out part one with this quote by Margaret Bottom. There are seasons when to be still demands immeasurably higher strength than to act. And so as we prepare for the eclipse, I'm finding out more and more that this influence is expecting us to carve out more time to meditate and to increase our quietude and indulge in the courtships with self, to take ourselves out on a date, to say to ourselves that we are forgiven, to pillow talk with ourselves. Thank you for joining me. Stay tuned for part two.